How's it going, everybody? Welcome back. This is part 2 of my two-part weapon rework video of how I would do things if I was CIG. If you haven't seen part 1, you need to go back and watch that first. I didn't want this one to be as big as part 1, but it is, unfortunately, and we're not going to be like recovering any of the stuff from part 1. This is its own separate thing because there's just that much stuff to cover. So we're going to go ahead and just jump into this one and get started. This is my referral code. If you're new and you haven't signed up for Star Citizen yet, using this when you create your account would really help me out, especially if you decide you like the game and want to get like a basic starter package. You know, all you would do for that is you would just go here, game packages, and you just got to get like the cheapest one in order to get the benefits. So like the $45 one or whatever, doesn't have to be anything crazy, but that, you know, gives me a referral point, and it would unlock some extra goodies for you when you use my code when you sign up. Alright, let's get into the video. Alright, so moving on to beam weapons. Those of you who have been around for a long time may know that they've been tried in the past, and they were hit scan. I think we had them on the Banded Defender, but CIG smooth-brained their implementation, and they were completely busted. Shocker, you know, you're doing full damage at any range with perfect accuracy, and there's no fall-off damage or anything, no spread, no chance to miss. Overpowered, you say? Oh, who would have foreseen this one coming? So rather than smooth-brain this, let me show you how I would do it. Now, you may have noticed I've got a lot of information for beam weapons here, and I'm going to break down and explain this, and I'm going to use this graph here to help you out. So, imagine this is your ship. Imagine this is the target ship. Beam weapons are, paradoxically, the shortest and longest range weapon, the way I've designed it. Now, you can make them do as little or as much damage as you want, but you don't have to sit there and cut their damage out of existence as a way to compensate for saying, oh, they have perfect accuracy. So, you may see I have like an optimal range here. At any point between here and the weapon itself, you're doing full damage. And then I have what I've called the min range here, or R-min. This is the minimum range at which a shot from this weapon can and will pause your shields if you are hit by it. So anywhere from this point to this point, a shot will stop the regen of your shields. This is a secondary balancing factor because beam weapons in this iteration, the way I've designed it, are completely built around fall-off damage. But even that is not good enough, so we added a second balancing factor, which is the regen pause. Because even if I was doing low damage out here, you could, in theory, kite somebody with a beam weapon equipped ship far outside of their range and keep them permanently paused with the shield regen just by doing any amount of damage. That would be really, really toxic. So that's why I've got these like soft balance mechanics here to encourage you to get closer, kind of like how you do with repeaters and stuff. I mean, yeah, unless you're targeting a really large ship, you typically engage at half the range of your repeater because it's, you know, the spread is reduced, there's less travel time on the bullet. Well, because a beam weapon is a light speed weapon, the travel time is instant. And because it is hit scan, like it's anything in front of it, you know, you don't have these cone or travel time mechanics to rely on. So what do? You design a weapon around fall off damage, and then you add in additional mechanics here. I can plot how much damage the target is going to take based off of the size of my weapon and where they are on any of these points. You know, so like right here, I said here and below, full damage. Right here is half damage. So if I was directly in between these two, like right about here, that'd be about 75% damage. If over here is 0 damage, and this is half damage, then that means right there is about a quarter damage, or 25% damage. I know a lot of you Europeaners hate fractions, and I'm an American, and we're the fraction people. I saw that recently in a meme, so if you don't get the joke, don't worry about it. But, you know, like, all of life is math. You know, and you got to use it or don't. You can sit there and hate it. I mean, I guess that's an option too, but, you know, why hate it when you can use it to your advantage? And then the next thing I want to mention is that right here, because it would look really weird if you fired this beam weapon and then right here at the 0 damage, like the FX just completely cut off. So this part isn't really for damage. This is more for like the FX department and visuals. But what I would do is right about here at the optimal range. So from here to here, you have the full, I guess, luminosity of the beam. Like that's as bright as it's going to be. And then from right here out to here, it starts getting dimmer the further the beam goes. However, it doesn't cut off right here. I'll explain that in a second. So this would be full brightness, and this right here would actually be half brightness. So what I would do, and again, this is completely for the UI department, this has no bearing on gameplay, I would make the computer only track the target out to this distance, but I would make the beam itself physically go further past this point by, you know, whatever this distance is to this, and it's going to vary depending on the weapon, but it would go further past that. Anything past this point, you're basically getting it with a flashlight, but way out over here off screen, that is where the beam becomes completely transparent and disappears. Again, it's completely for UI sake, it's just to make it look better. You know, like I said, this weapon is paradoxically both the shortest and longest range weapon. So if you compare like a repeater to a cannon, the size 2 cannon is going almost 2 kilometers, just over 2 kilometers, whereas the repeater is 1.54. Beam weapon is technically doing damage all the way out to 2,370 meters for the same size weapon. However, you're doing little to no damage at that range, so you know, that's something to keep in mind. The arm min would probably stay the same, but another thing you could do, I mean, because this is just an example right here, another thing you could do is you could sit there and say that this right here is actually 75% damage, you know, like, oh geez, that's like 75% damage. And drawing with the pencil tool and a mouse is kind of terrible. But, you know, you get the idea. You could sit here and say that, okay, this right there is the 50% mark. As terrible as it is to draw in MS Paint with a mouse, I mean, that's not as bad as it could be, honestly. But yeah, you know, you get the idea. And thinking about it, I would probably leave things as they are for a balancing factor, because if you think about, you know, making this thing 75% damage instead of 50%, and I know this is like a weird fall-off curve, but this is right here, like that's basically half the distance that other size 2 weapons shoot. A little bit more than half in the case of the repeater. So if this was a weapon, say all size 2 weapons, just for the sake of the example, had 400 DPS. So if I was still doing 300 DPS right here at 1.2 kilometers, I would be vastly out DPSing everything else. I mean, that would be kind of impressive. It's one of those things you got to play with. Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it wouldn't be so bad to change that to 75% damage instead of half. But, you know, well, that's one of the things that you would play with in testing to see how it would pan out. And this is just for the example's sake. It's funny because I'm sitting here like actively trying to mull it over in my head while doing the video, and I'm like, do I really actually want to have it at half damage? I do think 75% might be a little better, because that way, this graph, it would just look better, but also, you, at any point where you're in range to pause the shields, you'd be stronger. And then any point where you're not in range, you'd be weaker. So, yeah, like the more I mull this over in my head, the more I'm like, yeah, that'll probably be 75%. Again, though, that's something you would catch with testing and play with before you actually, you know, you finish up. Because now that I've done this, it looks kind of weird. I mean, obviously I'm doing this free form without like a proper scale and alignment, so these things aren't spaced as they should be. But it doesn't really matter. In case you were wondering, I thought about it a little bit more, and I went with something like this. I think this is probably the optimal solution for the whole damage scaling thing, no pun intended. So this would be 66% damage, this would be 33-ish% damage, and that would be 0. And you can still plot this out, but you know, you get the idea. Spent enough time on beam weapons. Now it's time to continue on and talk about the rest of the stuff, and that is general armor penetration rules, and this is incredibly important. So, I mean, you can sit here and read this stuff, or I'll just read it to you. Standard weapons would have rules in place to where if I had, say for example, a size 5 weapon, and I was shooting at class 4 armor, or below, it would do full damage to the armor and the ship, not counting any damage reduction modifiers on the target itself, because some ships have like resistance coatings and an extra hull kinetic or energy resistance, whatever the heck it is. So that's how that would work. Somebody said in my previous video about armor, because this is very similar, like I already covered something like this with the armor system. However, I said shooting the same class of armor that you have the size weapon would do 70%, and then like you can hit one higher, but it's 35%, and then anything after that is 0. I've kind of spaced this out just a little bit more, so you can potentially engage more targets. This is another one of those examples where you would catch this in testing and decide how you want to tune things. Do you want the larger spread on weapons for gameplay? Because with this system currently, a Gladius with size 3 weapons could potentially damage a fast attack craft, just class 5 grade armor. Now, God, I'm actually going to cut the video right here. I have to put in something else before I continue to explain this, because it's very important. So I'll be right back. Alright, so this honestly should almost be its own video, or I should like probably find a way to like tack it on to the previous armor video. But it's so linked together with how weapons and armor will work and mesh together in the future, that, you know, I kind of don't know where to stick it, and that would also require me going back and doing the other video, which is just more work than it's worth. And, you know, CIG may not do it exactly like this. This is just, you know, kind of how I would do it, and we'll give you a general idea of how armor and ships and stuff will mesh together with the weapons that are on them. So you have to understand this info, and then also think about what size guns and the type of guns that are going to be on ships, and what their targets are going to be, and how they're going to interact. Like, you can't just make a weapon overhaul without talking about the armor, because it doesn't give you a holistic picture. So kind of like a map, you know, we got like an armor key here to understand things, and then the shields are just like, this is the quantity of shields and the size, and then the class of armor here. But this, you know, this is just a general guide to show you the different like rough classes or grades of armor. But I will say this, there is a caveat to understanding this, and it's very, very important. There are outliers. There's actually several outliers in the game. So, like, for example, the Terrapin is a small little data ship, but it is an armored brick shithouse. I mean, that thing is ridiculous with how, like, look, it's just a tiny little, almost Cuddy Black size thing, but it's running around in, like, you know, fast attack craft sub-corvette armor. So just because it has an armor class of something does not mean that it's going to have that HP system. That is strictly for determining what weapons are capable of doing damage to it, and how much damage said weapons do to the hit points. The hit points is detached from the armor system, and you know, a lot of people are like, oh, well, they're not supposed to have hit points, they're supposed to have, and you know, a system where things break off, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, well, how does, like, the way video games are designed, even if you don't see it, there's always math going on, okay? There's always math going on. So even if they're not displayed, there is going to be a hit point system. Otherwise, the game doesn't know, is like a yes or no flag, does this break from getting shot at? If so, when? You know, is it a high damage weapon or a low damage weapon? So just because you don't see it doesn't mean they're not there, okay, guys? So I'm getting yelled at in my other Perseus video by a, you know, it's a small group of people, but they seem to have completely missed the point and want to go off on a tangent on me. And in fairness, I misspoke, because I was doing it Oh Dark Ridiculous in the morning, and I said it was a picket ship like 100 times in the video, and that's partially true. It's a picket ship in this, actually, you know what, now I'll just get into that in a different time, or you guys can talk to me on Discord about it. It's beside the point. This video is going to be too long. Anyway, so we have outliers like the Perseus, which are roughly Corvette-sized ships, but they have frigate-grade armor. And that's because of the role and the lore behind it. So it'll have, like, Hammerhead-level hit points, maybe Hammerhead-level shields, but in terms of armor class, it's going to be an outliner, where the Hammerheads and the Galaxy and the Polaris and all kinds of other stuff, they've got Class 6 armor. The Perseus will have Class 7 frigate-grade armor, because it's a brick shithouse. And it's not just that one that does it. There's, like I said, there's the Terrapin, but then there's also the Anvil F7 series. Now, the F7 is technically a medium fighter, so let's say and this is not how I'm saying they're going to do it or how it's going to be, I'm just saying, just like for example's sake. Let's say, for example's sake, light fighters are around 2.5 to 5k hit points. We'll say 5k hit points for a light fighter, right? And then a medium fighter would be 10k hit points, and a heavy fighter would be 20k hit points. Now, light fighters would generally have class 2 armor, medium fighters would generally have class 3, and heavies would generally have class 4 armor. You know, the bigger the ship, the more hit points. The heavier the armor, the harder it is for weapons to punch through it, and the bigger the gun you need to actually knock that ship out. Makes sense, right? Well, in the case of the F7 series, since it is technically a really, really old ship that had shields added on after the fact as like an upgrade, and it comes from a time when it relied heavily on armor instead of shields, it, generally speaking, for its class, has less shielding than other medium fighters would. It still has medium fighter hit points, but as a trade-off, it gets a higher class of armor. So even though it's a medium fighter, and should be running around with C3 armor, most of the variants of the Hornet are actually going to be rocking heavy fighter armor, except from the, you know, the agile, stealthy Ghost, and that's just how I did it. I don't know if CIG is going to do it this way. Again, most of this is how I would do things and why I would do things the way I would do if I was a CIG dev and in charge of all this stuff. But that just gives you an example of some of the outliers. So just because you see it here doesn't mean that it's, you know, that this is absolutely final or this is how it's going to be in game. And it also, you know, just because you see like a certain class of ship have an armor that you don't understand, or it's too high or too low for what you think it should be, there's probably a reason for that. It does not affect the hit points. It more affects, like, again, what kind of weapons can punch through it. And I think I've talked about that because I'm recording these in all different like orders. I think I've already talked about that at some point in the video up to this point. So, but like I said, that's why this is important. If you want, you know, I did most of this stuff. You can just kind of look through it and get an idea for the quantity, size, and, you know, of shields and the armor and stuff. And I didn't really finish. Yeah, I didn't finish this. Okay, so fourth wall break. Sleep deprived me and totally alert me are two completely different people. Sleep deprived me likes to leave alert me funny messages that I forgot about, and then I'll see him and stuff like this. So I literally just, I had to sleep, and I'd never finish this, so that's why it's blank. It's not because I don't actually care. I mean, if I'm completely honest, I don't really care about Origin, but that's just me. I also don't care about Drake. Fight me, it's garbage. I know I've got so many chairs and like nail guns armed at me right now, but yeah, no, I don't care for their style. I really don't. There's a couple things that are good with Drake, but not many. I'm an Anvil guy, all right? Most of my videos where you see me flying, I'm in a Gladiator or an F8 or, you know, something else. Like, I'm an Anvil guy. I don't know what to tell you. That's my favorite. So yes, I'm biased. Fight me. Anyway, I'll cut the video here and I'll fill this in and we'll be right back. And then I'll just move on to the next topic, because it's really not going to be that big of a deal to see this filled in. Okay, and through the miracle of editing, here I am back again, and this is mostly done. Since the 350R is a racer, where, you know, if you watch my armor video, you'll see, like, in the system of, and the way I would do it, armor is a thing that can be added or removed on a ship-by-ship basis if you want to. You know, I think this thing should probably come with no armor stock, since it's supposed to be a high-performance racer. And if you put a bunch of armor plating on a sports car, you're going to get smoked in races versus other cars. But, you know, if you wanted to add it aftermarket, you could probably put Class 2 or Class 3 armor on there. I'm kind of on the fence on this one. It's getting into, like, medium-ish fighter territory, kind of. But I do think that it should probably be, like, more towards the Class 2 light fighter territory, because it is still a member of the 300 series, and the 300 series, while large, isn't really huge. I'll have to double check. I mean, see, now I'm gaslighting myself and thinking it over in my head. I'd have to give this more thought and consideration, but generally speaking, you know, I think that it's primarily a civilian ship for racing, yada yada, even if it may be physically large enough to be in the medium fighter, approaching heavy fighter-ish category. It's just not designed that way. So this would be one of the cases where the armor is actually less than other ships of that class. Alright. On to the next topic. Okay, and we're back here to this. So, like I said, with my previous system in the armor video, I made it to where a Gladius, for example, would only really be able to attack up to and including a heavy fighter. Whereas this system, I increased the spread a little bit. A couple people suggested I do that, and as I've said several times, it's one of those things that, you do in testing while you're designing it, where you sit down and you have the meeting. Do you want it to have a slightly larger spread, or do you want to be really aggressive with how, clamped down your range of potential targets is with your weapons? Because an armor system, at its core, is meant to not only act as an additional vehicle for balancing and tuning, but it's meant to prevent silly things from happening. So, in the example you just saw, when I had class 0 armor, and I said that that's technically unarmored, that's true, but it's also not true. That is unarmored for a vehicle, but it's also a thing that you would set to where you can't, punch something to death. Whereas you could have, class 00 would be, true, just raw hit points. And the other thing is, when is the last time you guys have heard of, a World War II fighter strafing and blowing up a battleship with its friggin' machine guns? Never. When was the last time you heard of a guy walking up to a tank and shooting it with his rifle or his pistol and blowing it up and taking it out? Never. So you either meet and exceed the armor's threshold for keeping damage out, or you don't. And if you don't, you shouldn't do damage to the vehicle at all, or hurt it, because the armor is there to keep damage out. That's why you have to get bigger and bigger guns to knock out things like tanks, or you have to completely change your approach and go with anti-tank missiles, or damage it via some other means. I can't tell you how much I hate X-Wing syndrome, and by that I mean the mentality that the entire universe should be killable by my little favorite starfighter, insert whatever fighter you want here. In Star Citizen, it's kind of the Gladius. The Gladius and the light fighters are meta right now because A, kill everything, and B, the raw stats on their mobility means that nothing else can touch them. Now, reworking agility and stuff is its own thing, and there's master modes coming out. I hate almost everything in master modes. I agree that things need to be slowed down or tuned, but that is not the way. That's almost its own video, and I kind of don't want to do it because I don't like doing really long form videos like this that are very technical. So I'm just gonna keep on track here and finish this one up, and then I can get to videos that I actually want to do, small rant videos and what ifs and things that I would like to see added to the game. There's actually a couple of videos coming up that I want to do that I am super excited for, because I don't like being negative all the time. I understand I'm the angriest gamer, and you guys come and subscribe to see my rants and see me tear into CIG, but again, fourth wall break, believe it or not, I actually don't like being angry all the time. It's not good for my health. I'd want to sit down and have fun. So, getting back to the weapons, in the way I've done it with this updated spread, as per feedback from my armor video, I made it to where the Gladius can not only do damage to heavy fighters, but now can even do some damage to things like the fast attack craft category, which is size 5 armor. But of course that assumes that the weapon example is a size 3 and not a size 5 like we have in the background here. And just because you're doing damage to that category of armor, like for example these size 5s are doing 15% damage to a frigate, because class 7 is frigate grade armor, you're still going to have size 5 damage in this example, right? So if you're doing, say, 1500 DPS, and then you're only doing 15% of your damage, you're only doing 225 damage, not counting any damage reductions that the ship has for armor. So say like you're using a projectile weapon, just for example's sake, and let's say they have a let's say they have a 30% reduction in damage. You're really only doing about 158 damage per shot. So yes, you're technically damaging a frigate, but good God, is it terrible at it. Like, maybe get a bigger gun or change your approach. Or get hundreds of guys and just locust swarm the thing. That's kind of why in the armor video I did before, I capped it at like +1 max, but you know, I understand that might not be what everyone wants to see. If I made an alternative version of that with this, then increase the spread. So wrapping it up here, you know, we've got your normal weapons. This is how they'll behave right here. And you can just read that. And then that's for standard weapons. You've got specialty weapons or special penetration rules for things like high pen railguns or like really powerful beam weapons that have yet to be developed. And they can have a bonus spread for the armor penetration. So in that example, like say I had a railgun, say it also had 1,500 DPS or whatever, well, instead of being like the standard weapons example, where it has to shoot at one size below to do full damage, since it has a +1 to the armor rule, it can punch across and shoot the same class of armor that the weapon size is rated for, and do full damage, and it can even attack one higher. Now it's doing 15% damage not to a frigate with a size 5 enhanced pen weapon. Now it's doing 40% damage to that, and it's actually able to barely chip away at like destroyer grade armor or like medium capital grade armor, which is class 8. You know, you kind of get the idea there. Now the inverse of that is true too. We could have weapons that have lower pen, like for example flak. And this is where, like, looping all the way back, you know, 2 hours ago to the beginning of the video, where I was tearing into CIG for stupid things like space shotguns. Where are my flak guns? Flak guns should be fantastic AoE weapons for draining shields, breaking components off of fighters, and harassing them, and, like, absolutely unmatched weapons, except in the case of maybe beam weapons, in terms of how good they are at intercepting torpedoes and missiles. And the flak weapons would kind of be as follows. So again, say similar example to the railgun, except it's the opposite. Say I've got a size 5 flak gun, and it's doing size 5 weapon damage, but because I have a penalty now on my armor penetration, the profile would look like this. And this is kind of how I've got all these weapons designed. I realize it's been a huge journey getting here to this point, but thankfully we're done. And if you've watched the videos this far, I really appreciate you. Like I said, I'm going to get into making some other videos now that I actually want to make, and hopefully this will be the last one of my super long technical videos. Oh, right, one other thing. There is also things like plasma weapons, and plasma weapons would be your bog standard damage over time. The way I would do it is I would have, like, repeaters and stuff like that. The damage over time that they inflict would be lower, like raw damage, than the cannons, because A, you have a higher rate of fire, and B, because it's a smaller weapon system, and the DOT effect would only last like 3 seconds in this example, because again, you have a higher rate of fire and they're weaker. Whereas the cannon, the DOT would obviously be much stronger than the repeaters, because there's lower rate of fire and also a heavier weapon. And I would probably extend the time of the DOT to like 7 to 8 seconds. And I would have them be equally effective against shields and armor, because it would probably be a hybrid weapon. Like, it would take ammo and energy. You would have heat buildup, and you would rely on your capacitors and ammo stowage in order to use this. So it needs to be a like really expensive but really effective weapon. And when you're hitting ships all, not only is it eaten away, but I'd also probably make it as like a fun mechanic, start imparting heat on it and making it hard for the target ship to get rid of excess heat, unless they have really, really good coolers. That's just the way that I would design weapon systems and stuff if I had supreme power in CIG. That's also how I do the armor. I have all different kinds of ways to do like spotting and stealth systems. I could go into the missiles. Actually, I'm going to go into the missiles right now, just as like a quick damage rework. I'm not going to talk about the craziness that is missile tracking and countermeasures and stuff like that, because that is honestly its own video, and I don't really want to do it, and nothing is working right now. We are so far away from a stable product that it's almost not worth the time to go into. Alright, so jumping into the missiles, let me take you down a trip down memory lane. A long time ago, missiles doubled in firepower after like every size increase, which frankly they need to go back to doing, because that was a good system. And then at some point they did their weird little rework, because components were still being designed and built, and they didn't have their proper like hit points, and because missiles had like large splash damage and stuff, it was just like one-shotting all the components off ships. They don't really do that anymore, but missiles have still been made like really crappy. So for example, these Scimitar and the size 5 missiles used to be doing about 23k damage, and they need to go back to doing like 20 to 23k damage. As you can see, the Stalker, which is only available on, even though you can buy it, it's only available for the Gladiator, and I'm not even sure if you can like physically put this thing onto other ships. Like this thing should be about 23k damage right here, whereas the other size 5s should be between like 20 and maybe like 21, 22, and then yeah, then the other one would be like 23. That way, these missiles can actually do damage to stuff that they're supposed to attack. Like, for example, we have... We'll just use the RSI Andromeda. So you can see, let me look at all that health. So if I was doing 20k damage, and keep in mind there's a 70% shield bypass with a 3% physical resist, that means I'm only doing just shy of like 6k damage. Let me get the calculator real quick. So let's say hypothetically I was doing 23k damage times the current shield bypass, and then what's the, okay, 47, because this is the way math works. That means I would be doing about 7.5k damage to this ship, meaning I would need to hit this thing at least 3 times to knock out one of these sections. That is ridiculous. That's why I'm in favor of, like I said, reworking the missiles and the penetration system and lowering the shields bypass to like 50%, and then making it to where, actually, now I'm wondering, because I've redone this video like twice because I didn't like the way it was going the first time. I'm wondering if I even talked about like redoing the shield bypass. I think I did, but let's operate on the assumption that I didn't, so I don't have to redo it again. Right now, kinetics are bypassing shields, 70% of it, which means that 70% of the damage that you do with the kinetic is getting through and attacking the hull. CIG was like, that's overpowered, so what did? They ruined the physical pen by adding this huge physical damage reduction. Well, the problem with that is, in addition to nerfing the crap out of the missiles, and it's not just size 5, it's all of them. I'm going to show you the other ones in a second here. The problem with that is now we're doing fractions of damage. Like, as you can see, I'm only doing 7.6k damage, roughly, to a ship like this, and really I should be two-shotting this thing with a torpedo, a size 5 torpedo, a ship of this size. Like, let's do the Gladiator's current damage, for example. Actually, no. Now, let me show you something that's even worse. We'll say about 15k damage right now. I'm doing less than 5k damage a shot with these torps, meaning I have to hit that guy. If I'm not using the best torpedoes, I have to hit him 4 times in order to knock him out. To the same section, mind you. Like, these ships have different sections, so if I'm hitting something like a Connie, which isn't even the biggest ship that you can engage with these torpedoes, I think, like, Corvettes would be around like the largest ship that you'd want to try and engage with size 5s. So if I'm shooting a Connie, for example, and I'm only doing just shy of 5k damage, that means all 4 torpedoes have to hit the same section. If 2 of them hit the nose and 2 of them hit the body, well, I'm still 2 shots away from the nose or 2 shots away from the body that I don't have before I can even soft def this thing. Or if the next 2 shots I plant in the tail section hit him, he's still, no matter like which different area of the ship you hit, he's still 2 shots away. So it's possible that I can hit a Connie 12 times with size 5 torpedoes and him still be chugging along. He'd be hurting real bad, but he'd still be chugging along. And you might say, Well, knock out the shields. Well, as I said before, the shields don't really do very much. That's only a 30% gain in damage. That's not much. Whereas if we change the shields to like a 50% bypass for kinetics, I'd leave it at 70% for missiles, and we lowered this thing to like 35%, we'd get a lot more damage. So in the same example, we'll say they fixed the damage of the torpedoes. That's 23% times 0.7, or that's 23,000 times 0.7. That's 16,000 damage. Now let's say I'm doing that damage to a ship with 35% resists. So now I'm doing 10k damage a shot. Now it'll only take 2 torpedo hits to a ship this size to soft death it. That is way better. And like I said, that's not the only problem. I mean, look at how terrible these missiles are with scaling between the different ones. Like the ballista, the size 7s used to be about 100, 105. This is still good. So what I would do is right here, I'd be making like size 6 weapons. They'd be doing about like 50k damage a missile if we had size 6 torpedoes. Size 5s, like I said, doing about 23, 24k. And then size 4s are the biggest pile of poo ever. I'm trying to get to them real quick. Like, size 4s are the ones that CIG did dirtiest. These things used to be about 10 to 12k damage a shot, which is exactly what they need to go back to. These things must be going back to about 10 to 12k damage a shot, because they used to be designed to take on, like, heavy fighters and other large-ish ships that are, like, just below sub-corvette. So, like, cutter, mole, like I said, heavy fighters, maybe, like, hull B, stuff like that. Like, that's the kind of things that these missiles used to go after. These are terrible. Like, look how low that damage is. You are better off, instead of taking 2 of the best missiles, that's 8k right now, you are better off taking more size 3s where you get almost double the damage. Like, that makes no sense. And then the size 3s, if size 4s were made to be doing about 10, 12k damage a piece, size 3s should be doing about 6k on the high end and about 5k on the low end. And then size 2 missiles should be doing about 2.5k on the low end and about 3-ish k on the high end. So this would go up a little bit, and these would come up quite a bit. Size 1 missiles right now are actually kind of fine. And because there's so many types of size 2 missiles, they're alright too. So I'd be making the Rattler doing about 4.5k. And then this would be... that'd be about 3k. And then this low one would be about 2.5. And then you would just scale up from there. Alright, that's about everything. I'm done for real this time. Thank you so much for watching.